Example. Start kind of, when we talk about on the art side of things, I always like to bring up chokes and gutters. Anybody know what a choke is? I do. Basically, if I'm going to run let's say and this is going to make sense to you because we're going to use these shapes, large and small, it all works the same. Let's talk about if we want to print a red circle on a black shirt, what do we typically have to do? We have to run a white underneath that red circle. Or we can print flash, print flash, print flash, print flash, print flash, and it's still kind of brown. So typically we run a white underneath our red. So we run the white, we flash it, put our red on top of it. You run a manual or an automatic. If you notice, nobody says they hold absolutely perfect registration. They say things like plus or minus 2,000s, plus or minus 1,000s. What that refers to is from the center of most carousel automatics or manual machines, there's everything starts from the center and goes out. There's a radial deflection from side to side that you can never get dead absolute perfect. So from that side to side, who prints that red circle on one pallet, a little white showing on one side, so we get our micro registration hammer out, we move it over just a little bit, and on the next pallet the white's on the other side. That's that radial deflection. Things are moving just a little bit and you can't really control that from an absolute micromanagement point of view. So what we would do is put a little choke. Basically it's maybe a quarter point white line around our underbase so that the red hangs over just a little bit. And if you think about that, that's how halftone works too. We choke our white printer ever so slightly and we're setting our dots on top of that white printer. If they're a little bit smaller, then we're able to cover that and not see any of that white peeking out, so you get a little bit better results. Anybody know what a gutter is? So if I take that same circle and I want to go half of it red and half of it yellow, so I print my white and I flash it with a little choke on it, I print my red and a yellow wet on wet, what happens to that line right down the middle? It starts to smear a little bit, gets blurry, it gets worse and worse and worse because of that little bit of movement, or maybe my mesh isn't great, or it's not, I don't have that high attention, or there's a lot of contributing factors. But if I put a little gutter in that white printer, that same quarter point, which is negative space, that allows for the yellow and the red ink to lay next to each other in that gutter. Now we have to make it small enough so you can't see it, but large enough so that it actually is effective. Make sense? It's actually a great way to do it. And if you look at some of these were, we run gutters around almost everything. Now your customer can't pick it out because you can't make it large enough so that a customer goes, well, why is that black line around my type? Well, so you have to kind of play with that because it's actually going to change shape when you go from outputting film to making a screen to printing on it, stepping on it. That space changes shape. Actually, it'll start to fill in, or if you get any undercutting on your exposure, it might be smaller than you designed it, so you're going to have to play with that size. We use a quarter point a lot, so I'm not telling you that's the ideal size. You're just going to have to play with that a little bit. But the reason I bring that up in this type of application, on the specialty side of things, a lot of the specialty inks are made to do something. Say a sculpture base, when it goes through the dryer, it comes up. Puff's a great example. When it goes through the dryer, it blows sideways and up. So if I don't make space for that, what happens if I run a white puff right next to a red ink and I don't make space for it? When a puff starts to draw that red up, I get this pink line on one side of my puff ink. But if I make a gutter there for it to blow into, it'll be a nice clean print. So gutters and chokes are our friends with specialty printing. The Epic series and the Oasis series provide a whole bunch of different applications. If there's a couple of different things that I would say to start with, especially on the Epic series, the Fashion Soft Base and the HD Clear, and I'll show you a couple of things on both of those. But there's all kinds of great techniques to use. I bring up the output options. If if you're running vellum or paper, sometimes it's difficult to get these thicker stencils built. If you're working on the textures types of things, the opposite of, we call it kind of an anti-texture, the water-based with a super soft can. You go to the other side where you actually have a texture. It's based on the screen itself. There's a stencil, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. The extended time of exposure sometimes will make it very difficult to use paper or vellum, so you almost end up having to use either a clear film or a direct to screen option. When we come to the screen, it becomes probably the most important piece. Our entire industry is based on the screen, whether it's automated, manual. We're basically taking an idea or a thought, the art, and we're translating it onto a shirt, onto a garment, and that's what the screen is for. So it becomes that much more critical. Paying attention to things like tension, off contact. There's a lot of pieces and parts that make specialty printing that much more attainable, but in order to do the simple stuff, you've got to, that's kind of the starting point. If you can hold a real clean, sharp vector piece of art on a white shirt, then theoretically you can step into the specialty printing applications that much easier. But if your vector printing is looking terrible in the first place, stepping into a specialty printing applications, you're just going to be killing yourself over it. There's what some of the dimensional types of screens will look like when we add a thicker stencil. There's a couple of ways to apply it. You either do a capillary film or an emulsion, a fast exposing emulsion with a whole high amount of solids. They're available. You want to play with them. They're going to take a while to kind of get dialed in and figured out when you start doing the texture types of things. One thing we've learned, I'll show you here, when we do our developing after the exposure, we'll do a lot of soaking rather than going to the sink right away. Has anybody played with the high density types of stencils? You expose it, you think you finally have your exposure dialed in, go to the sink, develop, wash, 15 minutes, almost got it dialed in perfect, in the middle of the A falls off. If you soak them, you run into a little bit less difficulty with that. Now, going from talking a little bit about water-based, talking a little bit about dimensional type of printing, we talked about a little bit of halftones. Today's specialty printer typically doesn't use one stencil anymore, or one emulsion, or one screen mesh. You have to kind of open that up quite a bit in that, and we do it this way, we use different colors, so we know our water-based screens are always brown, our halftone printing screens are always green, and our specialty texture screens are always red. Now you can buy all of those, a water-resistant emulsion, a nice dual-cure emulsion, and a nice high solids SBQ or pure photopolymer emulsion. And we just like to make them different colors so there's no way our screen guy can make a mistake. If we're running water-based, then we use brown screens, period. That's just how it works.